Frontiersman James Herod establishes the first permanent settlement in Kentucky. But now, he is fighting for its survival. The Shawnee have come to kill or drive out the settlers at Harrodsburg, and they flee back to their camp with a prize: the daughters of a slain settler. With help miles away, Herod plots to move alone against the warriors. Outnumbered and outgunned, he waits for the Shawnee to let down their guard. Finally, he sees his chance.
It's okay, it's okay. Go on. You know the way home. Go on.
Herod risks everything to save the captive girls. And now the fate of Kentucky hangs in the balance. James Herod's skills as a pioneer, soldier, and hunter make him a living legend in Kentucky, though he's largely forgotten today.
James Herod is probably the most unsung figure in the history of the 18th century frontier. He founded the first permanent settlement west of the Appalachians.
Had he not died so young, we might think of James Herod as the pathfinder of the 18th century, and Daniel Boone as somebody who trailed behind James Herod.
Forget Daniel Boone. If you want to call somebody the father of Kentucky, it's going to be James Herod.
Herod serves as a ranger at Fort Pitt, the last safe haven before countless miles of wilderness and hostile territory. He's already lived a full life on the frontier, one that began in tragedy.
Near the outset of the French and Indian War, Herod's father is killed, leaving his mother to raise 12 children alone on the frontier. She becomes known as the widow.
When you're trying to help your mother feed all your younger siblings, you often seek out new ways to make ends meet. And for Herod, that was traveling westward.
In the 18th century, the American West wasn't the Rocky Mountains, it was the Appalachians. And to that generation of explorers, the Appalachians were just as unknown, just as dangerous, but also just as potentially lucrative as were the Rocky Mountains to the next generation of frontiersmen.
While patrolling Fort Pitt, Herod comes across a former fellow soldier he served under during the French and Indian War.
Captain?
Captain Thomas Bullitt. Bullitt has returned, near exhaustion from a daunting expedition.
Whoa.
Surveying uncharted Kentucky, the danger of his mission evident in the dead companion on his pack horse.
I'm all right. I'm fine.
Sure, Captain. Here, come on. You're not far now.
Bullitt has been tasked with finding other brave men willing to venture into the dangerous, unexplored wilderness of Kentucky.
Thomas Bullitt is the man who was in charge of finding the people like James Herod to lead expeditions down the Ohio and into the Kentucky territory.
Come on.
By this point, Herod has a reputation as a skilled frontiersman, so he's a natural person that Captain Bullitt is going to seek out to help him explore the Kentucky wilderness.
For Herod, this is the opportunity he's been waiting for, the chance to make a claim on land of his own.
Some Bullitt. Preparations are being made.
The lands of Kentucky represent the future of the American colonies, a place where many Americans who had been locked out of property acquisition in the colonies could see themselves having a prosperous future.
It's a hazardous opportunity, one filled with uncertainty and danger.
They were traveling to do something no one else had done before, and that was settle in Kentucky, which was the equivalent in those days of trying to settle the moon. You're at the very edge of everything that's familiar to you.
Harrod and his partner, Hugh Wilson, set off down the Ohio River into the seemingly pristine Kentucky wilderness.
Good enough for me.
Yeah.
Want to get together some kindling?
Sure thing.
But they aren't the only explorers looking to make a mark in uncharted territory.
Hey, Harrod. What do you think DB stands for?
Well, it stands for Daniel Boone, son.
Daniel Boone was known far and wide, not only in the colonies, but back in England. James Harrod is a contemporary of Daniel Boone, and by many accounts, his equal as a marksman and explorer.
We met once before, Mr. Boone. My name's James Harrod.
Harrod. Must be one of the widow's boys, huh?
Yeah.
There's a rivalry that exists there as men search for the best lands, and James Harrod and Daniel Boone are no exception to that fact.
How long you been this far down the Ohio?
Probably a few months now, maybe more. Making my way back up to Fort Pitt and eventually back to Virginia, but certainly not in any hurry. Take a look at this. Doesn't get any better than this. Also put myself a home in about 3 miles in from here.
Impressive.
Yeah. It's not much to look at, but it's mine. It'll be here come next season. Bet you boys are starving, huh? Let's eat.
With Boone having beaten Harrod to the land, both men know it's time for Harrod to move on to find unclaimed territory of his own.
Trying to get to Licking River by month's end.
I'd say pretty much everything from here north is well covered. So you have to go a bit further on to get clear of what I've seen already, at least.
Shouldn't be a problem. It's a lot of country yet.
That there is. Safe travels now.
Harrod's encounter with Daniel Boone spurs him to redouble his efforts to find land worth claiming.
To American colonists, Kentucky at first looks like a pristine, untapped wilderness, but it's of course not untouched, it's not uninhabited. It had long been the traditional hunting ground for the Shawnee and the Cherokee, and therein lies the potential for conflict and danger.
It's hunting season for the Shawnee. They don't normally come this far south, but stay sharp. Don't have to tell me twice.
When Harrod was heading into Kentucky, he would have an understanding of what the hunting cycles would be for the natives. The natives were very big on being in tune with the life cycles of the animals. So there'd be a primary season that they would use for hunting, and he would have had some knowledge of that.
But for men like Harrod, the rewards of the land are worth the risk.
You hear that?
As Harrod is making his way through the wilderness, he comes upon what he describes as a remarkable spring. That's the first indication that this is a place, fresh water, where he might be able to settle.
Well, I'll be a fly in a tar box. It's perfect.
It had absolutely everything that you needed. It had easy access to the river. The land didn't need to be cleared before you could plant a crop. And yet there were woods that were absolutely full of deer. It was the perfect spot to found a settlement.
This is it. This is home.
We better make our mark before Boone does.
I was thinking the same thing.
Herod stakes his claim in the traditional manner, the same way Boone did, by carving his initials in a tree. He makes a plan to return the following year with men like himself, brave and industrious enough to carve out a settlement in hostile territory. But on his journey back to Fort Pitt, Herod's luck appears to run out.
Follow me!
And the future of Kentucky hangs in the balance. While returning from his first trip into unsettled Kentucky,
Follow me!
James Herod encounters what could be a fatal setback.
On his way back home to Pennsylvania, he encounters a Shawnee warrior party. They begin to chase him. As he's running, he encounters a second Shawnee hunting party.
There's more!
And then he's trapped between the two of them.
In military strategy, things like a ruse are part of the doctrine. You'll use some sort of trickery to fool them so that you can get the upper hand.
Faced with this perilous situation, James Herod begins calling out to a group of comrades that don't exist.
Come on, boys, let's get them! There they are, give them a whopper!
The natives realize, ooh, he's got friends out there, we don't want to get ambushed, so maybe we ought to skedaddle. He bluffed, and he got lucky.
In that instant is when Herod is able to escape. These kind of stories defy imagination, but that's life in Kentucky.
Undeterred by his close brush with death, Herod heads back to Fort Pitt, committed to returning better positioned for success.
Believe it or not, finding the place to settle was the easy part. Herod had to spend the next several months recruiting the men he would take with him westward.
A year later, Herod has recruited a crew of bold and capable pioneers from across the colonies. Together, they'll return to the Kentucky territories to carve out the first settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains.
You needed people with specific talents, people who knew how to hunt, people who knew how to work metal, people who were good shots, and people who knew how to survey land.
These are young, brave men with much to gain, but not without risk.
They were heading into the frontier with nothing but their flintlock and whatever supplies that a pack horse could carry, and that was it. Canoed up the Ohio River, found the spot that Herod had located, and it was just a perfectly situated piece of land to build a settlement on.
Herod begins to establish the first permanent American settlement west of the Appalachians, the town of Harrodsburg.
Herod's men are impressed. The land more than lives up to his promises.
Let's get to work.
The men don't waste a moment and soon begin staking out markers for a new town.
There were a group of French and Indian War veterans, frontiersmen, most of them, men whose credo in life is, you can't tell me what to do. They were all willing to follow him out into the wild frontier to get something that they could own.
Herod and his men have bet everything on the old law of the Commonwealth. That if you grow some crops and build a lasting community, eventually the land will be legally yours.
Life on the frontier required community. You could live by yourself and hunt, but you couldn't do that forever. To truly live on the frontier, you had to work together. You shared food. You helped one another and took care of one another. And when the time came, you fought to defend one another.
Harrodsburg will become the first settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains. Herod's men build rows of cabins across acres of wilderness. And soon, Harrodsburg gets its first visitor.
Look at you, Mr. Herod.
Daniel Boone.
Couldn't have done it better myself.
But while Boone was finding a path through the mountains, Herod has been building a community.
Well, I think it's the best I've ever seen it done.
When Daniel Boone first arrives at Harrodsburg, he's very impressed with what he sees. This isn't just some hunting camp. This is a real, permanent addition to the landscape.
You must see the rest of it. Men will be excited to meet the famous Daniel Boone. Well, by all means, lead the way. Although I'm not sure how happy they'll be once they learn why I've come.
Look who's found us.
Gentlemen?
But this is no social visit. Boone has come with a dire warning.
Real reason I came over here, James, is give you a warning. War is coming. I've been given direct orders to warn everyone this side of the mountain to pack it in.
We're not too interested in orders around here.
I'm not saying for good, just for the season.
In 1774, the Shawnee rose up in rebellion against the colony of Virginia. And the governor of Virginia sent Daniel Boone to Harrodsburg. He tried to impress upon Herod just how much danger there was. Herod didn't take the threat seriously.
These Shawnee, they're not interested in just hunting these parts. They're here to drive everyone out. I'm not playing tricks on you.
No, you've got your own claims in these parts, Boone. And you're enthralled to that fancy Virginian finance here.
No, that's not it. Not today, James. I'm delivering a message. A warning from the governor of Virginia. Nothing more. All right?
Okay.
I got a few more miles ahead of me, so, yeah. Hey, take these words to heart. You don't have a lot more time.
Herod ignores Boone's warning, but he doesn't have to wait long to discover that the danger they face is real.
Herod, by this point, is used to being self-sufficient. He's used to the independence. He doesn't take the threat seriously. Until 2 days later, when his men are killed by a Shawnee raiding party. At that moment, he realized the gravity of Boone's warning.
The Shawnee have come to kill or drive out any settlers they find. Herod escapes this encounter with the Shawnee and is determined to defend against their next attack.
James Herod very commonly would go out and reconnoiter. And in one instance, he overheard a group of Shawnee warriors discussing a plan.
The Shawnee tribe has been stirred to action by Chief Blackfish.
In 1774, the settlers are able to extract an agreement from the Shawnee chief Cornstalk that there will be no attacks by any Shawnee. This is an agreement that does not sit well with other members of the Shawnee, like Chief Blackfish, who refused to acknowledge it.
What Blackfish was doing was to get even and to try to drive people out of Kentucky.
Chief Blackfish vows to rid the land of colonial invaders.
Now is not the time. We must wait for larger numbers. Then we can strike next season.
Herod had spent extensive time in the Illinois Territory and other places where he encountered native languages and culture. In many cases, he could communicate with them, and he knew exactly what these sorts of warnings meant. They were dire harbingers of what was to come.
You're not allowed!
Herod is discovered, but Hugh Wilson is there to back him up.
Herod, run! Get out of here! I'll meet you back at the homestead!
Just days after Daniel Boone's ominous warning, Herod is fleeing for his life. Kentucky pioneer James Herod has encountered a party of Shawnee warriors determined to rid the land of unwanted settlers.
You're not
With the Shawnee's swiftest warriors in pursuit, Herod sees the river as his only chance to escape.
When Herod's being pursued by the Shawnee, he's outnumbered, but he knows the landscape. And when he sees the river in front of him, he knows this is the equalizer.
Herod has the advantage over his pursuers, but only for a few moments.
The Shawnee have to cross that river. They're doing it with loaded muskets. If their powder gets wet, their weapons are totally neutralized. This can give him the upper hand.
Turn back now, fellas!
He gives the Shawnee one last chance to save themselves.
Che vuotami le pateke! Pain hala questi! We ascoltate!
Later, while out hunting, Herod is stunned to find the warrior he shot washed ashore. In the unforgiving world of the frontier, few men would do what Herod does next.
I ain't gonna hurt you. I don't mean you any harm.
You would think that this would have made James Herod have animosity toward Native Americans. But he is rare among the frontiersmen who pushed into that area at the time. He was known to be kind, thoughtful, a well-rounded man.
Herod returns to his settlement, knowing Blackfish will lead a Shawnee attack that could come at any moment.
Herod!
But a surprise awaits him.
There's something you want to see.
Uncle Jim!
Oh!
The daughters of his good friend Hugh Wilson have arrived from the colonies.
When James Herod built Fort Herod, and he saw women and children coming, the entire game changed for him. It was no longer about him. It was no longer about roughing it and survival. It was now about defending people who could not defend themselves.
Protecting the newly arrived families is now Herod's top priority.
This is a time of constant danger for the settlement at Harrodsburg. And that's because, of course, back east, the Revolutionary War has begun.
Encouraged and, in many cases, equipped by the British, the Shawnee launch a series of attacks against settlers in Kentucky, hoping to drive them back from their lands. The British, the Americans, the natives all had the understanding that they claimed Kentucky. But the reality was, on the ground, you only controlled it as much as you could defend it.
But with the British backing the Shawnee, the settlers will need more than just strong walls to survive. They turn to the newly formed American government for reinforcements. They get one man, George Rogers Clark.
Gentlemen. As the American Revolution broke out, settlements in the East had little they could spare in terms of resources to preserve Kentucky. But there was one resource they could send, and that was a young man by the name of George Rogers Clark, who was appointed as the defender of what is now Kentucky.
No doubt we've a brutal year ahead. The British have armed the Shawnee to the teeth. They're coming. They're coming for you, for the women, and the children too. No one will be spared if we fail. Yet, I couldn't ask for better men to face them down. With the authority of the state of Virginia, I promote you both to the rank of captain. Effective immediately, if you accept it.
It's an honor.
Yes, sir.
As soon as he arrived, he appointed the men who led these settlements as captains who would serve under him. James Herod and Daniel Boone would play a pivotal role in developing the defenses that would preserve Kentucky.
Captain Herod, with your permission, I'll quarter one of your blockhouses.
As long as you need.
Now, if settlements like Boonesboro or Harrisburg fall, it will give the British a new foothold in North America, and it will force the Americans to begin fighting a two-front war, which is exactly what the British want.
After evaluating the situation, Clark soon learns of a critical shortage.
When George Rogers Clark gets to Harrodsburg, he feels very good about his position. Those are strong positions, but if you don't have gunpowder, you cannot defend them.
Without gunpowder, Harrodsburg won't stand long against the coming Shawnee attack. A Shawnee uprising has put the settlement of Harrodsburg in constant danger. With precious supplies running low, Harrod finds himself out of gunpowder in the heat of battle.
A mighty fine shot.
Without gunpowder, Harrodsburg won't last long against the twin threats of Shawnee attack and a dwindling food supply.
They were getting down to a point where not only did they not have anything to eat, they didn't have any way to defend themselves, they didn't have any way to obtain anything to eat. How can you go hunting if you don't have any gunpowder, much less defend yourself from attack?
This is it. This is the last of it.
With few options, Harrod dispatches George Rogers Clark to Virginia to make a case for support and supplies.
George Rogers Clark headed east. They arrive in the fall of 1776, and they explain the value of Kentucky settlements.
Rogers Clark convinces the governor of Virginia, we need something to fill our rifles. We need your lead. We need your shot. We need your powder.
After making his case for Kentucky, Clark is given precious gunpowder. But getting it back to Harrodsburg won't be so easy.
As Clark and his men head down the Ohio River, the native enemies realize that the gunpowder is on its way, and they will exact a heavy toll from Clark's men before they arrive.
The Shawnee are waiting for them. Clark orders the gunpowder to be hidden until it can be safely retrieved.
Clark himself, he strategically hides the gunpowder to survive and make sure it remains.
The only solution was to bury it in 4 or 5 secret locations along the banks of the Ohio River. Clark's traveling companion, who had made it all the way from Fort Harrod, is killed. Several men give their lives.
Clark has traveled hundreds of miles through a hostile wilderness and returns empty-handed.
Yeah. The governor granted us over 500 pounds of gunpowder.
Well, that's just fine, Major, but where is it?
Harrod sets out with Clark and Daniel Boone to retrieve the hidden gunpowder.
Right here. This is the spot.
The barrels have remained undiscovered, buried in the soft bank of the Ohio River. Now, all they have to do is get it back to the fort at Harrodsburg without getting caught or killed. After joining up with other men from the settlement, Harrod brings their precious cargo through terrain and trails he discovered during his earliest days exploring the territory.
As Harrod travels southward with the powder, he knew too much to let his guard down. Rather than take the most direct route, he takes a roundabout way down the river.
Against all odds, Harrod brings the gunpowder through, undetected by the Shawnee.
Harrod was really the only person who could have made this happen. He not only knew how to get from the Ohio River to Fort Harrod, he understood the terrain, but he also understood what it meant to bring supplies safely from the river all the way to central Kentucky.
Harrod has greatly improved the settlement's chances of survival, but the worst is still ahead. Winter and the Shawnee are coming.
To Kentucky in 1777, called the Year of the 3/7, was perhaps the bloodiest year of all. Blackfish, the Shawnee, swept down through the Ohio Valley, attacking the settlements.
Now, if settlements like Boonesboro or Harrodsburg fall, it means that the American colonialists will be driven back across the Appalachian Mountains.
Blackfish has besieged Fort Harrodsburg for months and isn't showing any signs of relenting his assault.
Essentially, the Kentuckians were prisoners within their own forts.
Imagine you can hear a couple of hundred Shawnee warriors within earshot singing. It's like a chant, something that tries to drive your enemy to despair, to get them to lose heart.
That has a cumulative effect psychologically of wearing you down, the pressure of knowing that outside of your gates there be dragons, things that want to kill you.
With no end in sight, families are beginning to leave, and Harrodsburg's population is slowly dwindling.
What are they thinking? Water will wash them away. The wind will blow them down. Darkness will cover them. And the earth will come upon them.
Not a song to dance to.
Nope. Afraid not.
As the Shawnees sing of the settlers' doom, it seems that James Herrod's dream of a life in Kentucky is about to end in blood. The American Revolution has begun, and on the Kentucky frontier, James Herrod and the settlers of Harrodsburg are on their own.
It was a time of constant threat of raids, Indian warfare of all manner. You never knew when the attacks were coming and who would survive to see the next day.
Blackfish doesn't believe in the possibility of any kind of peace with the Europeans. To him, the only option is to repel the settlers by any means necessary.
After weeks of uncertainty and dread, the fort holds strong and the Shawnee withdraw. But they remain close, watching and waiting for an opportunity. And the settlers can't hide behind the walls forever. If Herod is unable to protect and provide for the community of Harrodsburg, he stands to lose everything that he's built.
As crucial as the fort itself was, it was impossible for everyone to stay inside all the time. Livestock had to be tended, homesteads had to be built.
People trying to raise their crops, if they left the fort to go out and work in the fields, frequently were shot and killed or captured.
How long? Less than a week, maybe 2.
After months of being virtual prisoners inside their own fort, unable to harvest fields, unable to hunt, the deer had turned skittish and had moved off.
Cattle were slaughtered, fields were burned, and houses were destroyed.
The siege has decimated their food supply. So Herod and a few brave men sneak out of the fort to hunt and bring back what they can.
Herod was known for going on these hunts that would take a week at a time sometimes. But when he was successful, he would return to the settlement with enough meat to sustain everyone in it.
Entering the woods where the Shawnee lie in wait is an incredible risk. But the only other option is starvation.
James Herod would travel to the distant hinterlands of Kentucky. He and his men would gather game. They'd shoot elk and deer and bison. It was not ideal, but you have to change the rules if you want to survive.
He would then dress the animal right there on the scene, right after he killed it. He would then portage up the meat from the animal and bring it back to the settlement.
But before he can return with food, Herod hears a chilling sound.
Inside the fort itself was a large cedar horn that could be blown to recall settlers to the fort to ensure that they were safely inside before any opposition arrived.
Hide the game. We're close enough.
The warning clarion isn't just a call to action, but a reminder of what matters most: the lives of the families who call Harrodsburg home.
Have you seen Wilson? Have you seen the girls? Has Wilson come in yet?
I fear the worst, James. We blew the hole and we saw the smoke rise.
Smoke!
You can still see it.
The Shawnee were not idle. They were determined to root out these settlers in one way or another, and if they couldn't reach them, they could reach their homesteads.
Heedless of the danger, Herod rushes forward, praying he isn't too late. His friend, Hugh Wilson, is dead, but there's no time to grieve.
One of the realities for these settlers in Kentucky was that during a raid, if you had daughters, if you had sons or wives, if you were man hunting, you may not come home, but you may be taken to a place that will become your home.
Herod still has a chance to save Wilson's daughters, but he's alone and outnumbered.
As Herod begins his pursuit, he realizes that there are too many of them. He can't take them all on at one time.
Herod knows a direct attack is futile.
Rather than attacking all at once, coming in strong with a tomahawk in one hand and a rifled musket in the other, Herod realizes now's the time to move in close.
Herod proceeds with caution, knowing one misstep risks everything. If he is discovered, it will mean his death and the girls lost forever. In pursuing the kidnapped daughters of a fallen friend, one misstep by James Herod puts them all at risk. Alone against impossible odds, all he can do is watch and wait for the warriors to let down their guard.
Over and over again through these frontier accounts, Herod is placed in circumstances where he has to take cover and wait. Patience is as much of an important skill as the use of the musket or the use of the tomahawk. He sees that some of the warriors are asleep by the fire, but that one of them is awake, the sentry. So he pulls back, he leans up against a tree and falls asleep, but literally with one eye open.
The rising sun brings Herod's last, best chance to rescue the girls.
The warriors in their encampment, several of them are asleep. The sentry then ultimately lays down by the fire alongside the other warriors. That's the point at which Herod realizes it's time to strike.
It's okay, it's okay. Go on. You know the way home.
Herod then releases the two girls who have been bound up, and they flee into the wilderness.
Herod has saved the Wilson girls, but he may have sacrificed himself. He knows he needs to act quickly or join his friend in death.
You never know what you're capable of until you have your back absolutely up against the wall. And you're not only trying to save yourself, you have several hundred people who are relying on you to keep them safe.
Herod's only chance? To trick the Shawnee into believing he isn't alone. A gambit he's tried before.
Come on, boys! They're right here! Give them a whopper!
Herod using that ruse to kind of get out of trouble successfully. Of course, if he's done it once and made the Indians go away because of, hey, yo, come on over and get these guys, then it makes sense he's going to try to do it again.
Herod's ruse works a second time, and he is able to escape. But he and the girls won't be safe until they make it back behind the walls of Fort Harrodsburg.
I'm so glad you're okay. Let's keep going.
He frees the two girls and then returns them safely to the settlement. And it's this kind of frontier story that was just catnip for readers about a century ago. Readers couldn't get enough of these tales of daring and bravery on the frontier.
In the coming years, thousands of settlers stream into Kentucky, knowing they'll be protected by men like James Herod.
The people of Harrodsburg remember what James Herod did for them and for the community. They understand that his legacy was the foundation that their lives are built on.
Let's hear it for Captain James Herod. May he never be forgotten.
But he won't get to see Kentucky become a state or Harrodsburg grow to a thriving city within it. In 1792, with Kentucky on the cusp of statehood, James Herod vanishes into history.
James Herod departs on a hunting trip in February of that year and never returns. There's been a lot of speculation about whether he was murdered or whether he was injured in a fall.
Maybe he was in search of treasure, or maybe he simply wandered into the woods and disappeared. We don't know.
There are some men just not cut out for the modern world. Despite all the adventures, despite all the success, it still wasn't enough for them. And they never stopped journeying deeper into the frontier.
This is it. This is home.
James Herod deserves his place in history as a founding father of the modern state of Kentucky. His place in the history of Kentucky and in westward expansion is undeniable.
James Herod was a man of very few words, but he was a man of action. He was a man who walked the walk as well as talked the talk.
Turn back now, fellas!
He had given decades of his life to ensuring that people in Fort Herod and the surrounding area would have a future and a place to live. But once he disappears, there's no more of the legend to be celebrated in the same way there was for Daniel Boone.
It's a fitting end to a man who is almost written out of history, but his accomplishments are still there for us to recover and celebrate.